Hello and welcome to the first week of class. In this lecture, we're going to talk about Lesson 1, which covers Chapter 1 and Chapter 3 respectively. As you can see, we'll talk about managing risk and information systems. That's actually the book. We'll talk about in Lesson 1, risk management fundamentals, compliance laws, standards, and best practices. So let's get started. So our learning objectives for this lesson is to explain the basic concepts of and need for risk management organization. And we'll also identify compliance law standards, best practices, and policies of risk management. And our key concepts, we'll be able to define risk, balancing risk, the 7 domains of a typical IT infrastructure. And I want you to pay particular attention once we get to that section, the 7 domains of a typical IT infrastructure. Basically you have the user, the LAN to WAN, you have a system application, just to name a couple of those that we'll touch on, and that will tie closely back to your lab that you'll have to address. And so then we'll address the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. A lot of people call that the CIA triad. You will hear me refer to that quite a bit in this course. So anyway, the CIA triad is not a Central Intelligence Agency by any means, but it does mean confidentiality, integrity, and availability. We'll touch on compliance laws and regulations, and basically the United States risk management initiatives. We'll also look at the standards and guidelines used for compliance, and many of you have probably seen some of those. So Chapter 1, Risk Management Fundamentals. Just as anything in building a house, basically you have to have a strong foundation. And so if you don't have the strong foundation, then your house could fall, settle, cause a lot of damage later on in the future. So why pay all that money and not do it right? So we're going to talk about the risk management fundamentals. And I want to start out with a quote from, and some of you may have heard this through your lessons before. The quote comes from the Chinese general Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu wrote The Art of War. It's a military treatise that emphasizes the importance of knowing yourself as well as the threats you face. And this was around 500 BC. I think that was a little bit before some of us were born. So he goes on to say, therefore I say, one who knows the enemy and knows himself will not be in danger in 100 battles. One who does not know the enemy but knows himself will sometimes win, sometimes lose. One who does not know the enemy and does not know himself will be in danger in every battle. So basically, to protect your organization's information, you must, 1, know yourself. That is, be familiar with the information assets to be protected and the systems, mechanisms, methods used to store, transport, process, and protect them. And secondly, know the threats you face. To make sound decisions about information security, management must be informed about the various threats to an organization's people, application data, and information systems. As illustrated, basically a threat represents a potential risk to an information asset, whereas an attack represents an ongoing act against the asset that would actually result in a loss. Threats is basically damage an organization's information or physical assets by using exploits to take advantage of a vulnerability where controls are not present or no longer effective. Unlike threats, which are always present, attacks exist only when a specific act may cause a loss. For example, the threat of damage from a thunderstorm is present throughout the summer in many places. But an attack and its associated risk of loss exists only for the duration of an actual thunderstorm. The following sections that we'll talk about in this chapter, especially chapter 1, is we'll see the risk, threat, the vulnerability, and we'll talk about loss. And then there's two types of loss: tangible and intangible. Tangible is measurable and intangible is not. And so we'll touch on some of these. Basically risk, the likelihood that a loss will occur. Losses occur when a threat exposes a vulnerability. And basically a threat is an activity that presents a possible danger. Just because it's a threat doesn't mean it's going to happen, but you need to prepare for that. A vulnerability is simply a weakness. And so a loss in a compromised business functions or assets, and as I mentioned, can be as tangible or intangible. So what are some of the compromises to business functions? Let's say, for instance, salespeople regularly call or email customers. If the capabilities of either phones or emails are reduced, sales are reduced. A website sells products on the internet. If the website is attacked and fails, then sales are lost. Assets can have both tangible and intangible values. The tangible value is the actual cost of the asset. The intangible value is value that cannot be measured by cost, such as client confidence. Generally acceptable accounting principles, the GAAP, refer to client confidence as goodwill. Imagine that your company sells products via a website. The website earns $5,000 an hour in revenue. Now imagine that the web server hosting the website fails and is down for 2 hours. The cost to repair it is a total of $1,000. So what is the tangible loss? So let's look. The lost revenue is $5,000 times 2, because we're down for 2 hours, equals $10,000. The repair cost is $1,000. So your total tangible measurable value is $11,000 for the website being down. The one thing that makes it intangible is to know it's not easy to calculate how many people would have visited your site during those times, and how many possible loss of sales that you would have lost during those 2 hours. So those are things that you cannot measure unless you keep good metrics and data. Let's say, for instance, the website went down on Tuesday from 1 to 3 right after lunch, and so you can go back to your records and say, well, normally on Tuesdays from 1 to 3, that's when people go to lunch or come back from lunch, and they're doing some kind of shopping or browsing around, and that's when our sales equal X amount of dollars during this X amount of time. And so you can somewhat measure that based on history. And so, but then you may come into a holiday season or special occasion that would have had more traffic during that time. So profitability versus survivability. Profitability is the ability of a company to make a profit. Profitability is calculated as revenues minus cost. And then, of course, survivability is the ability of a company to survive loss due to a risk. Some losses, such as fire, can be disastrous and cause the business to fail. In terms of profitability, a loss can ruin a business. In terms of survivability, a loss may cause a company never to earn a profit. The costs associated with risk management don't contribute directly to revenue gains. Instead, these costs help to ensure that a company can continue to operate even if it occurs, or even if it incurs a loss. When considering profitability and survivability, you would want to consider the following items: out-of-pocket cost, lost opportunity cost, future cost, and client stakeholder confidence. Of course, we all know all of those things factor into whether you make a profit or not. And too much out-of-pocket cost, you're not making a profit, so why stay open? The lost opportunity cost, let's say, for instance, your website's down for 2 hours, and just as we mentioned, and those customers that normally would have bought from you during those 2 hours have went to another website, another company that sells the same product, and now they have bought from there. So one, you've lost a customer, and so two, now you have to find new customers. It's easier to retain customers and manage those retained customers than it would be to go out and find new business. So those are lost opportunity costs, and a lot of that's measured through intangibles. So your future costs, basically the countermeasures require ongoing or future costs. The cost could be for renewing hardware or software. Future costs can also include the cost of employees to implement the countermeasures. And of course, the clients and the stakeholder confidence. So basically, can you keep your customers and your stakeholders that are your investors mainly? Do they have confidence in you? And so, if you don't have that, then your business isn't going to survive. All right, so the 7 domains of a typical IT infrastructure, as we mentioned earlier, this was something that we were going to touch on, and especially you will find this throughout the duration of this course. We'll refer back to the 7 domains of a typical IT infrastructure. So if you can, or if you will, write down each one of the 7 domains as you see on the screen here. The user domain, the workstation domain, the LAN domain, LAN-to-WAN domain, remote access domain, the WAN domain, and the system application domain. So you have all of these that make up the IT infrastructure. So if you can, I would write these things down and see, as we talk about these, what is actually associated with these domains. And obviously, like the user domain and like workstation, these are common sense names, so you can sort of put 2 and 2 together. Like, for instance, the user domain includes people. They're users, employees, contractors, or consultants. Basically the old phrase that a chain is only strong as its weakest link applies to IT security too. So people are often the weakest link in IT security. So hence the user domain, especially when they can give up passwords or compromise passwords by writing them down and sticking them to the monitor, or sometimes they're less blatant than that, and so they actually stick them to the bottom of their keyboard, which is also a big no-no. So users, tend to visit risky websites and download an executable infected software or execute infected software. They may bring a virus in from home with a thumb drive or different things. So anyway, that is probably your biggest weakness in IT infrastructure is the people. Workstation domain. The workstation is the end user's computer. The workstation is susceptible to malicious software, also known as malware. If antivirus software isn't installed, the workstation is vulnerable. The workstation is also vulnerable if it is not kept up to date with recent patches. And so some malware infects a single system, and while others release worm components that can spread across the network. I can remember working for the DoD as a systems administrator, and some of you may or may not be old enough to remember the Melissa virus, where it's like, please read. And so it infected hundreds of computers, and literally hundreds of computers that had to be rebuilt from scratch. And so you're talking about a lot of overtime and a lot of time spent rebuilding folks' systems because they clicked on a Word document that had a macro built in that infected not only their system but everybody on the email list. And you see how it goes, and then to that list and to that list and to that list. So essentially, it spread like wildfire. So now let's talk about the LAN domain. The LAN domain is the area that is inside the firewall. It can be a few systems connected together in a small office or a home office, or it can be a network with thousands of computers. Each individual device on the network must be protected, or all devices can be at risk. Network devices such as hubs, switches, and routers are used to connect the systems together in a large area network, which is, like we say, is the LAN. The internal LAN is generally considered a trusted zone because you're basically going from inner office to inner office, from one computer to the next without having to leave your organization, literally with a router or go through a firewall. So basically everything is behind the firewall and it is in-house. And so data transfer within the LAN isn't protected as thoroughly as it was sent outside of the LAN. So an example, sniffing attacks occur when an attacker uses a protocol analyzer to capture data packets. A protocol analyzer is also known as a sniffer. An experienced attacker can read the actual data within these packets. When hubs are used instead of switches, there's an increased risk of sniffing attacks. An attacker can plug it into any port in the building and potentially capture vulnerable data. When switches are used instead of hubs, the attacker must have physical access to the switch to capture the same amount of data. Most organizations protect network devices in server rooms or wiring closets that only certain people have access to. So let's talk about the LAN-to-WAN domain. The LAN-to-WAN domain connects the local area network to the wide area network. The LAN domain is considered a trusted zone because it is controlled by a company. The WAN domain is considered an untrusted zone because it is not controlled and is accessible by attackers. The area between the trusted and untrusted zone is protected with one or more firewalls. This is also called the boundary or the edge. And so in this course, you will hear these terms, boundary devices or edge devices. And so that's what it's basically talking about with, the firewalls and the equipment to maintain that firewall. And so basically when we say boundary or edge, it's also referred to as boundary protection or edge protection. The public side of the boundary is often connected to the internet and has public IP, which is Internet Protocol addresses. These IP addresses are accessible from anywhere in the world, and attackers are constantly probing public IP addresses. They look for vulnerabilities, and when one is found, they pounce. Because of this, the Internet is an untrusted zone. A high level of security is required to keep the LAN-to-WAN domain safe. Let's go to the remote access. This one's somewhat of a touchy one. I can remember certifying products with the DoD, especially tactical systems, for systems that went to overseas to help our warfighters, the system that we had, you could have one central system, and you could have child systems. So you have the parent system and the child systems, but the parent system had to remote into the child systems, even though they were set up the same. There was a whole different accreditation just for remote access, and a lot of paperwork, a lot of time, a lot of security to increase. And so, but remote access does have the potential of having a large risk. And so, basically, mobile workers often need access to the private land when they're away from the company. So remote access is used to grant mobile workers this access. And so if you're sitting in a hotel room, whether it's a Hampton, Holiday Inn, Marriott, whatever your favorite chain is, insert there. You're using their public Wi-Fi, which is a public internet address. You don't know the security of that. So basically you're on their Wi-Fi and with a public IP address, and so you're susceptible to an attacker during that time. So in order to access your local LAN back at the office, a VPN will need to be established, which is a virtual private network. And basically, it provides access to a private network over a public network. So the public network used by VPNs is most commonly the internet. Since the internet is largely untrusted and has known attackers, remote access represents a risk. Attackers can access unprotected connections. They can also try to break into remote access servers using a VPN as an example of a control to lessen the risk. But VPNs have their vulnerabilities as well. So two vulnerabilities that apply to VPNs is, basically the authentication is when the user provides credentials to prove their identity. If these credentials can be discovered, the attacker can later use them to impersonate the user. The second stage is when data is passed between the user and the server. If the data is sent unclear, or basically sent in clear text, an attacker can capture and read the data essentially with no effort. So it's basically the VPN establishes a tunnel for the connection, but you also need to have encapsulation and encryption to help protect that data. You don't want to send it in clear text, you want it to be encrypted. And so let's move on to the WAN domain. For many businesses, the WAN is the internet. However, a business can also lease semi-private lines from private telecommunications companies. These lines are semi-private because they are rarely leased and used by only a single company. Instead, they are shared with other companies. As mentioned in the LAN to WAN domain section, the internet is an untrusted zone. Any host on the internet with a public IP address is at a significant high risk of attack. So a significant amount of security is required to keep hosts in the WAN domain safe. And as you can see right up here, the WAN domain, there's many of you recognize those devices. The system application domain refers to servers that host server-level applications like email servers that receive and send email for clients, database servers, host databases that are accessed by users, applications, or other servers, DNS servers, domain name system, which servers provide names to the IP address for clients. You should always protect servers using best practices. For instance, change the default passwords. And one of the things is working as a systems administrator, setting up servers. You disabled the guest account. You also disabled any unneeded services, because any of those services can serve as a backdoor for any attacker. And so usually, people that work on these, it's basically, it becomes a challenge for people that work on these servers in the system application domain, is that the knowledge is specialized. You have to have training for that and certain certifications. So Some of you may be familiar with the DoD 8570, and a lot of times people with server access would have to have a level 3 technical certification, some well known as the CISSP certification. So anyway, let's move on to the next slide here. The CIA, no, not the Central Intelligence Agency, but the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So confidentiality is basically preventing unauthorized disclosure of information. Data should be available only to authorized users. Loss of confidentiality occurs when data is accessed by someone who should not have access to it. Data is protected using access controls and encryption technologies. And integrity is ensuring that the data or an IT system is not modified or destroyed. And so basically how they verify the integrity is they use a method called hashing. That's to ensure the integrity of the data. And so availability, that's ensuring the data and services are available when needed. IT systems are commonly protected using fault tolerance and redundancies techniques. Backups are used to ensure the data is retained even if an entire building is destroyed. And so if either one of these go down, you have an impact. A vulnerability is a weakness. It could be a procedural, technical, or administrative weakness. It could be a weakness in physical security, technical security, or operational security. Just as all threats don't result in a loss, all vulnerabilities don't result in a loss. It's only when an attacker is able to exploit the vulnerability that a loss to an asset occurs. So survivability and balancing the risk and cost. Every organization needs to consider the cost to implement a control and the cost of not implementing control. And so you weigh your good and your bad, and is it cost effective, or will this cause other things to become non-functional, which means you have to modify other things. And so spending money to manage a risk rarely adds profit. We know that. Important point is that spending money on risk management can help ensure a business's survivability. And so if you can stop a threat from happening, then is it worth it? I would say yes. The cost to manage a risk must be balanced against the impact value. And so let's look at the impact value. The chart's pretty self-explanatory. So let's say the high-level threat likelihood 100%, 1.0. If you look at the low impact 10, medium impact 50, high impact 100. So it's basically 10 times 1 equals 10, how that works. That's for high-level threats. And the higher the number, the greater the threat. Let's talk about the role-based perceptions of risk. You see management at the top, and management is they're concerned with profitability and survivability, but basically the buck stops with them. They hire people underneath them that may have more IT security and IT background with information security than they do, and they trust those people for advice and what they need to spend and what they don't need to spend, and what controls to implement versus the ones not. And of course, we talked about the profitability and survivability and how you balance that. But ultimately, when it comes down to the company, senior level leadership is ultimately responsible. So, as you see, systems administrators, those are the specialized folks that work on the email servers, the domain servers, the web servers. Those have a particular specialty or expertise to operate those. Tier 1 administrators is more like your help desk type persons, like when someone calls and they can reset a password, simple functions. I know there's more to help desk personnel than that. I used to work at help desk many years ago, and so we were more of I guess the section that I was in, we were more of a tier 2, which involved more advanced troubleshooting and that kind of stuff. And so, basically, then you have your developers. Some organizations have their own in-house application developers. They write applications that can be used in-house or sold. And then, obviously, you have the end user. If you're an employee, then obviously you're a worker bee, you're the end user. And so basically the risk identification process, as we mentioned earlier from the quote, you must know yourself and you must know your enemy. You need to identify the threats within your organization, identify the vulnerabilities, and then you want to estimate the likelihood of a threat exploiting a vulnerability. The loss of confidentiality is basically when someone sees your password or company's secret formula. The loss of integrity, for instance, is an email message is modified in transit. A virus infects a file or someone makes unauthorized changes to a website. The loss of availability is an email server is down and no one has email access, or a file server is down so data files aren't available. And you and I know very well that in this electronic day and age where everything is passed digitally, we somehow think we can't survive without email. If the email's down for half a day, then we can't perform our work. But that's happened in 3 or 4 of the places that I've worked. In organizations that I supported. I'm like, why can't you just pick up the phone and call somebody and talk with them? So anyway, I won't go down that rabbit trail. So a threat identification is the process of creating a list of threats. The list attempts to identify all the possible threats to an organization. This is no small task. The list can be extensive. Threats are often considered in the following categories: external or internal, you have natural or man-made, intentional or accidental. And so your threats, external, internal, natural, man-made, intentional or accidental. Your vulnerabilities, basically audits, certification, accreditation records, system logs, prior event, trouble reports, incident response teams. And you'll probably hear me say this during the semester in other lectures. Basically the techniques of risk management, avoidance. What can we do to avoid the risk? Acceptance is how much are we willing to accept, or which risk are we willing to accept over others? Cost benefit analysis later on in the text and later lessons. In your labs, you will address the cost benefit analysis, residual risk. Um, those things all exist. So we're going to take a small break, and I'll come back and finish up with Chapter 3 when we talk about managing compliance. So we'll be back in just one moment. All right, so that was Chapter 1. So now we're jumping into Chapter 3, managing compliance. Maybe you're awake after that first chapter's lecture, so I'll try to keep you awake during this one. Compliance, managing compliance. This is a tough one. A lot of regulations to cover, and some of you are familiar with them. The FISMA, which is the Federal Information Security Management Act, and you'll hear me refer to this one quite a bit because out of that you have the Risk Management Framework, which is known as the RMF. That came out of that one. The DoD uses that as their framework to protect their systems. Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA. When you go into a doctor's office, you have to sign a form, and you can elect to say, okay, I want my wife, or I want my friend, or my cousin's best friend's dog to have access to my medical records. And so if their name's not on there, they're not getting access to the records, or they should not have access to those. The Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, GLBA. You'll hear the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which is SOX, SOX. Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA. That applies to you and I. I cannot give your records out without your consent, or neither can the university give your records out to anyone without your consent. So the Children's Internet Protection Act, CIPA. And so basically within any modern society, individuals elect to trade some aspects of personal freedom for social order. I believe it was Jean-Jacques Rousseau explained in the Social Contract or Principles of Political Right in 1762, basically laws are the rules that members of a society create to balance an individual's right to self-determination with the needs of the whole. Laws or rules adopted and enforced by governments to codify expected behavior in modern society. They're largely drawn from the ethics of a culture, which defines socially acceptable behaviors that conform to the widely held principles of the members of the society. The key difference between law and ethics is that law carries the sanction of a governing authority and ethics do not. Ethics, in turn, are based on cultural mores, which are relatively fixed moral attitudes or customs of a social societal group. Some ethics are thought to be universal. For example, murder, theft, and assault are actions that deviate from ethical and legal codes in most, if not all, the world's cultures. So basically, as a future, go back a slide here. As a future information security professional, you'll be required to understand the scope of an organization's legal and ethical responsibilities. Information security professional should play an important role in an organization's approach to controlling liability and privacy and security risk. In the modern litigation societies of the world, sometimes laws are enforced in civil courts excuse me for that. So let's go back. The information security professional should play an important role in an organization's approach to controlling liability Um, and for privacy and security risk. In the modern litigious societies of the world, sometimes laws are enforced in civil courts, and plaintiffs are awarded large payments for damages or punishment, or basically to punish defendants. To minimize these legal liabilities, the information security practitioner must understand the legal environment and keep apprised of the new laws and regulations and ethical issues as they emerge. And basically, by educating the employees and management about their legal and ethical obligation and the proper use of information technology and information security professionals can keep their organizations focused on their primary objectives. Beyond that, the information security professional has a unique position within the organization. Each is trusted with one of the most valuable assets the organization has, its information. Not only are these professionals responsible for protecting the information, they are privy to the secrets and structures of the systems that store, transmit, and use and protect that information. Thus, they are individuals who must be beyond reproach with the highest ethical and moral standards. Bear with me just one moment here. Yeah, so basically the Roman poet Juvenal, in his work Satire 6, asked, who will watch the watchman, basically is what he wrote. And this expression has gained unique meaning with the information security community. And as information security professionals, above all else, understand the challenges and need for accountability. Partly for this reason, it is not yet the industry standard for organizations to hire new employees directly into information security positions unless they have established experience at other organizations where they have proven their trustworthiness. While the standard may change in years to come, most organizations still expect new hires to prove themselves worthy of the responsibility associated with a high trust role. So therefore it's imperative for you to understand and take to heart this expectation of trust, the expectation of being beyond ethical reproach as you continue your professional journey in information security. So the U.S. compliance laws and their applicability. FISMA obviously applies to federal agencies. HIPAA, any organization handling medical data. The GLBA, the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, pertains to banks, brokerage companies, and insurance companies. FERPA, we mentioned earlier, educational institutions. The SIPA, which is the Child Internet Protection Act, schools and libraries using E-rate discounts. Excuse me. So basically in the HIPAA compliance process, they cover organizations that handle health data, medical facilities, insurance companies, any company with a health plan if employees handle health data. So that one's pretty self-explanatory. The U.S. compliance regulatory agencies, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, no, that is not the Southeastern Conference. Although a lot of money comes to their schools when it comes to football season anyway. The Federal Trade Commission, the FTC. As you can see, the Federal Trade Commission here in the slide covers several agencies that have a broad scope with them as well. The U.S. compliance regulatory agencies, if you've done any type of banking here in the U.S., you hear of the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and basically insures your money up to a certain amount, so that way you're not a total loss if the banks or something were to collapse. Department of Homeland Security, DHS, State Attorney General, AG, U.S. Attorney General, USAG. Organizational policies for compliance, fiduciary responsibility, and the fiduciary refers to a relationship of trust. Could be a person who was trusted to hold someone else's assets. And of course, a trusted person has the responsibility to act in the other person's best interest and avoid conflicts of interest. I don't know about you, but there's not many people that you can trust with $100,000 these days, right? Okay, let's move on to a couple of slides I want to skip. So the standards and guidelines for compliance, the PCI DSS. If you use a credit card of any type, you will pay close attention to this one. It's the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standards. It's basically a set of standards that was developed by the large credit card companies, basically to is basically required for merchants using specific credit cards. Several standards and guidelines exist that can be used to assess and improve security. Most of these standards are optional. However, some are mandatory for certain sectors. Like I mentioned, the PCI DSS is mandatory for credit card merchants. You see the NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. The GAISP is the Generally Accepted Information Security Principles. COBIT, as you'll see, there's some videos that I put out there too beyond the lecture that talks about the COBIT framework, which is basically control objectives for information and related technologies. The ISO is the International Organization for Standardization. The IEC is the International Electrotechnical Commission. And the ITIL, ITIL, is the Information Technology Infrastructure Library. And then you have the CMMI. You'll hear me mention this somewhat throughout this, the term as well, which is the Capability Maturity Model Integration. And one of my favorites, Risk Management Framework, is the DoD. But before they went to the Risk Management Framework, they had what they call DIACAP, D-I-A-C-A-P, which is the Department of Defense Information Assurance Certification Accreditation process. Talking about your red tape and bureaucracy, there it is. So let's talk specifically about the payment card industry. PCI DSS, basically it's an international security standard. The purposes of the PCI DSS is to enhance security of credit card data. It was created by the PCI Security Standards Council, with input from several major credit card companies, and these companies include American Express, Discover Financial Services, JCB International, MasterCard Worldwide, Visa, and so the goal is basically to thwart theft of credit card data. Fraud can occur if a thief gets certain data. The key pieces of data are name, credit card number, expiration date, and the security code. Many of us would call that as the PIN number. So basically, the theft becomes really easy if the thief has all of this information. And so, excuse me, this data is often transmitted to and from the merchant. It can travel wirelessly from point of sale machines. It travels from the merchant's computer to an approval authority. It can be intercepted at any time it's transmitted. It can be easily read if it's not encrypted. And so one of the things, many of you probably heard about the Target breach back in 2012, I think is when it was, where a lot of debit card and credit card information was stolen. The only saving grace that helped Target was that the PIN numbers that were used were encrypted. So basically the thieves and hackers, all they had was credit card numbers. So you really can't do anything with it without the PIN number. So they just sort of had useless data. So the PCI DSS is built around 6 principles. Each of these principles has 1 or 2 requirements. The principles and requirements are build and maintain a secure network, protect cardholder data, maintain a vulnerability management program, implement strong access control measures, and regularly monitor and test networks, maintain an information security policy. So basically, merchants using the credit cards are required to comply with the PCI DSS. Compliance is monitored by the acquirer. This is the company that authenticates the transactions. Compliance with the PCI DSS is a 3-step continuous process. This process is shown in figure in 3.3 of your book on page 71. You basically assess, remediate, and report. And of course, the process is repeated several times. Now the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technologies, let me get up here and catch up on my slides a little bit. So we're not ready for that slide just yet, so let's stay back here on this one. But we'll cover the National Institute of Standards and Technologies. It's basically a division of the U.S. Department of Commerce. The mission of NIST is to promote U.S. innovation and competitiveness. NIST hosts the Information Technology Library, the ITL. The ITL develops standards and guidelines related to it. And a lot of times when you go to the NIST, you'll see their titles SP, which is SP 800-30, which means a guide for conducting, which is basically conducting the risk assessments, is valuable when studying risk management. So SP stands for special publication. And so the one that I referred to, the SP 800-30, which would be a good guide for you guys to read during this course. It's quite lengthy, but it's well worth the read. It basically has the introduction, like most papers. It's a short chapter that identifies the objectives and gives some references. But it talks about the fundamentals, the importance of risk assessment. It includes definitions for many risk terms. It also presents some models used to assess risk. And then it gives you the process. Identify relevant threat sources, identify potential threat events related to threat sources, and so on and so on. Generally accepted information security principles, the GASSP, the GASP, was created in 1992. GAISP, as we mentioned earlier, was an update to the GASSP. GASP version 3 was released in August of 2003. It was adopted by the Information Systems Security Association, the ISSA. However, GAISP is no longer mentioned in the ISSA website. Additionally, the GAISP.org website is no longer maintained. But it includes two major sections, the GAISP does. It's pervasive principles and broad functional principles. So that's all we'll cover on that one. So now let's talk about the 7 COVID enablers. Those are the videos that I have down there outlined for you to watch. It's about 30 minutes worth of videos. There's about 13 altogether. They're short videos, but it defines each step in the process, and they do a whole lot better job than I do. But basically, the control objectives for information and related technology. COVID is a set of good practices. It applies to IT management and IT governance. IT governance, which is also known as ITG, refers to the process that ensures IT resources are enabling the organization to achieve its goals. Further, ITG, basically the IT governance processes help ensure the effectiveness and efficiency of those resources. COVID helps link business goals with IT goals. The IT Governance Institute, ITGI, worked with ISACA. That used to stand for something, the ISACA, but they strictly go by their name now. They've dropped the acronym. And so, or the words associated with the acronym, they've dropped it, so they strictly go by ISACA. ISACA was previously known as the Information Systems Audit and Control Association. So now it only uses the acronym. And so basically, on their website, you can find out COVID resources at http://www.isaca.org/COVID/pages/default. The overall goal of COVID-5 is to get the most value from IT assets. As you can see, the first enabler is principles, policies, and frameworks. These translate desired behavior into practical guidance. The second step, basically the second enabler is the processes. These are the practices and activities performed within an organization. Processes help an organization reach its IT-related goals. And third, the organizational structures. This refers to the entities making the key decisions. Many organizations define these in organizational charts. Then number 4, the culture, ethics, and behavior is basically success depends on these factors. These include individuals and their entire organization. Number 5, you have information, which is organizations rely on accurate information. This is true for both operations and governance. Number 6, you have service, infrastructure, and applications. And those are organizations basically rely on the IT processing and service providers by these elements. And so finally, last but not least, is the people, skills, and competencies. Successful completion of activities is dependent on these enablers. There's your ITIL life cycle, ITIL life cycle phases, service strategy, service design, service transition, service operation, continual service improvement. The CMMI, this is a good one here. So the capability maturity model integration is a process improvements approach to management. It uses different levels to determine the maturity of a process. CMMI can be used in 3 primary areas of interest: product and service development, service establishment management and delivery, and product and service acquisition. So basically the capability maturity model is designed specifically to integrate an organization's process improvements activities across disciplines. A practical introduction to integrated process improvement provides a concise introduction to the CMMI product suite. So as you see at the different levels there of the CMMI, level 0 is non-existent. That's basically security controls are not in place. That's not a good thing. There's no recognition of a need for security. Level 1 is the initial stage. This is sometimes referred to as ad hoc or as needed. Risks are considered after a threat exploits a vulnerability. You don't want to be at this level. Level 2, managed. The organization recognizes risk. The organization recognizes a need for security. However, it performs controls out of intuition rather than from detailed plans. Responses are reactive. That's not a good level either. Level 3, defined. The organization has security policies in place. It has some security awareness. Action is proactive. And now we're starting to get to the higher level where you want to be. Level 4, quantitatively managed. The organization measures and controls security processes. It has formal policies and standards in place. It performs regular risk assessments and vulnerability assessments. Level 4 is acceptable for most any organization. Level 5, optimized. The organization has formal security processes in place. Throughout the organization, it monitors security on a continuous basis. Its focus is on process improvement. Level 5 shows the highest level of maturity. So that's where you want to be. So now we're talking about the risk management framework, the RMF, for Department of Defense Information Technology. So basically, as we mentioned, the DICAP, which is the old accreditation, certification and accreditation process, to risk management framework for DOT. Basically, they transferred over, migrated in March of 2014, and I was in the mix of that process, and it was not a smooth transition by any means, but I do prefer the risk management framework over the DICAP process any day. Basically, the risk management framework has the following capabilities. It promotes the concept of near real-time risk management and ongoing information system authorization through the implementation of robust continuous monitoring process. And so if we go back on the slide here, and we're talking about the CMMI process, level 5. optimized. The organization has formal security processes in place throughout the organization. It monitors security on a continuous basis. So you see the similarity there with RMF would meet that process. So the risk management is an ongoing information system authorization through the implementation of robust continuous monitoring processes, encourages the use of automation to provide senior leaders the necessary information to make cost-effective, risk-based decisions with regard to the organizational information system supporting their core missions and business functions. Risk management framework integrates information security into the enterprise architect and system development lifecycle. It also provides emphasis on the selection, implementation, assessment, and monitoring of security controls and the authorization of information systems. As you can see, and basically the risk management framework links a risk management process at the information system level to risk management process at the organizational level through a risk executive, which is basically a function. It establishes responsibility and accountability for security controls deployed within the organizational information systems and inherited by those systems, and a lot of those are known as common controls. So the RMF process basically changed the traditional focus of certification accreditation as a static procedural activity to a more dynamic approach that provides the capability to more effectively manage information systems, related security risk in highly diverse environments of complex and sophisticated cyber threats, ever increasing system vulnerabilities, and rapidly changing missions. Basically, the risk management framework operates primarily at Tier 3 in the risk management hierarchy, but can also have interaction as Tiers 1 and 2, providing feedback from ongoing authorization decisions to the risk executive, which is the function, dissemination, and updating. So Tier 1 is your organization, that's the governance side. Tier 2 is basically the mission business process, which is information and information flow. And Tier 3 is the information system, that's the environment of the operations. So as you see here, you have 6 basic steps for the risk management framework. And you have step 1 is to categorize systems. This is basically where the information system and the information process stored and transmitted by that system based on an impact analysis. Select security controls. And you'll hear the word baselining throughout this semester too. So select security controls is basically an initial set of baseline controls for the information systems based on the security categorization. Excuse me, I'm all tongue-tied today. Tailoring and supplementing the security control baseline as needed based on an organizational assessment of risk and local conditions. So basically, a risk management framework is more local than it is broad versus the DICAP. DICAP was more of a broad DoD. Risk management framework can be tailored to the organization as it meets its needs. So implement security controls. This is basically describes how the controls are employed within the information systems and its environment of operation. Assess security controls. This is using appropriate assessment procedures to determine the extent of which the controls are implemented correctly, operating as intended, and producing the desired outcome with respect to meeting the security requirements for the system. Authorize the system is based on the determination of the risk to organizational operations and assets, individuals, other organizations, and the nation resulting from the operation of the information system, and the decision that this risk is acceptable. And finally, the monitor security controls in the information system is on an ongoing basis, including assessing control effectiveness, documenting changes to the system or its environment of operation, conducting security impact analysis of the associated changes, and reporting the security state of the system to designated organizational officials. While the tasks that make up all the elements of the RMF are discussed, or as we'll discuss, Step 4, assess, and Step 5, authorize, have replaced the CNA approach previously used for federal information systems, like I mentioned, as the DICAP. So I probably didn't mean to spend as much time on the risk management framework, but I have extensive experience with the risk management framework, because I spent many hours writing documents and justifying risk and controls on our systems that went to support the warfighter. Very secure systems. So hopefully you've learned from lesson 1, defining risk, balancing risk. And as I mentioned, I would go back and look at the 7 domains of a typical IT infrastructure. Those you will see often throughout the semester. So I would make myself a little chart if I were you, list each one of the domains and do a little research on your own, and find out what type of scenarios fall within each one of those domains. You will see that on some of your labs that you'll have to work with. And some of them can cross over domains. They can have a lot of similarities and a lot of characteristics. So, basically, it's kind of like a Venn diagram where they can overlap each other. To say so, we've addressed confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Any information security professional will need to know this. I know the 3 simple definitions, but that's what all of the information security is based on. It's protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability in the organization and the data. So we talked about the compliance laws and regulations. Then we've talked about the U.S. risk management initiatives, standards, guidelines used for compliance. So we talked about those, the PCI DSS, COVID. We mentioned, a bunch of those things. So, very interesting read in this chapter. A lot of good reading. So, I wish you good luck in this lesson. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. I'm here to help. I'm here to facilitate your learning, and also provide you with personal experiences that I've had over the past 20-something years working with the DoD, either as a contractor or as a civil servant. I have a vast knowledge in that area, and so, and of course, I have a master's in cybersecurity, which covers a lot of this information that you guys have just covered in the first couple of chapters. So anyway, good luck, and if you need me, give me a shout.